This is Gene Montrose, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 507, originally aired April 14th, 2021. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are. Whatever time of the day you're getting a chance to listen to this, thanks for spending some time with me today. Today, we are going to talk about, in conversation with Alan Davidson, about an approach to parts work using archetypes and how we can use that particular lens as a way of creating more useful transformation and evolution in our work. Before we do that, just two quick announcements. First of all, we have a free 10-part guide on how you can use tapping to eliminate self-sabotage. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com, click on the big blue button, enter your email address, and every day over the course of the next 10 days, we will send you a resource to help you to get more out of your tapping and to get some transformation around the places you are sabotaging yourself. Second, I'd like to send a shout out to all of the supporters of the Tapping Q&A podcast. I'd especially like to thank Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the most recent supporter of the podcast. Supporters of the podcast, in addition to feeling good because they're making a difference to allow conversations like this to show up to you absolutely free of charge, also receive some amazing bonuses in that process. If you would like to be like Elizabeth and support the show, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/support, and thank you to all of our amazing supporters. The conversation I am about to share with you is, for me and for a lot of people, a really bittersweet conversation. This is a conversation with my friend, colleague, and client, Alan Davidson. Alan passed away as I'm recording this about a week and a half ago. And this interview is probably one of the last interviews he did. It is something that I've actually had in the can for a while. And for whatever reason, I just kept putting off sharing it, not knowing why. And it just feels super appropriate to be sharing it here today. The editing of this, I've already edited it before. I always edit before I record the intro and outro. It was a pretty amazing experience to sit here in conversation with a friend who I will never have an opportunity to do something like that ever again. But beyond the personal or not personal connection that you might have with Alan and his work, the conversation itself is very, very powerful. One of the reasons that Alan and I connected very early on when we met was our appreciation for parts work and our different approaches to parts work. And that comes out a lot in this conversation. I gave a presentation on parts work, and afterwards Alan came up to me and he's like, okay, I need to study with you. I need to pick your brain because you and I do this differently and I love to learn. And it was, for me, such a fruitful back and forth of disposition and approaches. Parts work itself is super powerful because what it allows us to do is it allows us to take our human experience and break it down into smaller, manageable pieces. That we are such complicated creatures that I can be thinking 3 things and feeling 6 things at the exact same moment as I'm being pulled in multiple directions. And some of that might be because I have lots of things going on in my life and I'm being pulled one way because of my work and another way because of my relationships. And inside of a single issue, I could be pulled 3 different directions, wondering which is the way to go. And so parts work is a way for us to take slices of our human experience into a manageable way. So we're not trying to deal with the whole. And because of the type of slice that we use, we're creating a vocabulary that allows us to work with that. I've always said that the subconscious mind is a metaphor machine. And the really cool thing about the metaphor machine that is the subconscious mind, that as we change the metaphor, we change the part. And as we change the part, we change the system. And so it gives us a safe, gentle way to go after very, very complicated issues in our life and tease them apart into transformation. And so the beautiful thing in this conversation is Alan does a really great job of comparing and contrasting our two different styles in approaching this. And both are really useful and really valuable. And part of it is disposition, and part of it is training, and part of it is experience, and why we enter in the different ways. And so I hope you find this conversation as fruitful as I did. It was great to re-listen to it this morning, not just to spend some time with my friend, but to really listen closely to his teachings and think about the way that we can approach transformation in such a beautiful way. So here is my conversation with Alan Davidson. You and I have been having an ongoing conversation over the course of the last couple of months about parts and the way that we approach things. And I think at a high level, dispositionally, you and I have a very similar approach. And in the vocabulary and the way that we kind of unpack the human experience, we come at it in pretty different ways, in really cool complementary ways, but different ways. When you're thinking of the person, and you're doing the work that you're doing, and you're helping people to see themselves through the different lenses of parts, what are the lenses that you use, and how did you kind of come to thinking in that way?
Well, you just ask a big question.
I do.
So I'll say that as an ex-IV drug user, I spent a lot of time avoiding the experience of my body, avoiding the experience of my emotions, avoiding sensation. I lived in this very small mental world that felt like it was about 2 inches in front of my forehead. Mm-hmm. And so for me, my healing transformational journey came when I reclaimed my body. And I did that through massage school and becoming a body worker for 30 years. And in the midst of realizing, that the body is the portal for all healing and transformation, I began to understand that not only do I have this perspective that lives 2 inches in front of my head, that I actually have this whole cast of characters that live inside of me. Mm-hmm. And some of them are very healthy, and some of them are very unhealthy and defensive and protective. And that even in the midst of that, there are some parts of me or sub-personalities or pieces or selves that are actually super conscious, and they're the parts of my soul that are calling me forward into wholeness and healing.
I'm a stickler for words just because I like to know what people are actually saying. So when you use the word super conscious, what do you mean by that particular statement?
Well, again, coming from the world of addiction and IV drug use, obviously I was in a lot of psychic pain, emotional, mental pain. And so I really moved into meditation and the spiritual world to try to solve that psychic pain. And so I come at it from a classic Eastern Enlightenment perspective of, there's the ordinary human experience, there's the ordinary sense of a self, an ego self, and then there is a certain point when we can transcend that envelope of ourself and our perspective and move beyond it. And that is usually a sense of thought slowing down, time slowing down, or thought stopping, time stopping, and that real sense of, wow, I am beyond my human experience here. I'm in this vast, spacious. So when I talk about super conscious, it really is an experience of transcending the self and moving into the universal and even beyond the universal.
Why do you see that as a useful part of the healing transformational process? Like, why is that super valuable to be accessing that particular part of our experience?
Because one, just the transcending the self. Well, one, it's like a vacation. It's like, oh my God, I'm free of that limiting sense of who I have believed myself to be and all my petty concerns and worries and thoughts and yada, yada, yada. But one, there's just the move beyond that. But here's the other thing. So whether you move into that infinite stillness, that sense of peace, the Buddha mind, however you want to describe that, there's amazing healing qualities that can be tapped. And literally, I use the word specifically tap, bring that back into the self and bring a sense of peace and stillness to the parts that are still very distressed and disturbed. Okay. And the divine feminine aspect of that is, and you and I have been talking about Mary in
Yeah.
our ongoing conversation, that divine love can also be tapped, infinite love, and brought back into the self to help to heal the parts that are still contracted and hurt and pain.
What then are those specific lenses and the specific archetypes that you are using? Is that something that is unique to each person? Do you have a set of them that you see as part of the human experience? Like, what is the vocabulary that you are using as you are doing this work on your own, or you're working with someone?
Well, I would say that, my foundation is the work of Carl Jung. I consider myself a Jungian. And so there's the foundation. So there's the parts, the subpersonalities that live within our normal everyday self. And I use the analogy of the boarding house that James Hillman and this. I know you like the corporation or the company.
Yep.
I like the boarding house. And so, there's a normal everyday waking self. In the basement are the defensive parts, the wounded parts, that at the very bottom, the innocent and vulnerable parts. And then you move up in the boarding house. The way I see it is the soul parts, in the top floor, the penthouse. So there's the archetypes and the subpersonalities that live within us that we can work with and consciously. But then the archetypes that I love to tap into are all the mystical states of being. And again, they're the great avatars, the ascended masters, but particularly like the archetypes of the Eastern traditions, Buddha mind, big mind, infinite stillness, the stillness of pure being. There's the cluster that I call the battle goddesses of compassion. They're the great, fierce goddesses of compassion. Kuan Yin, Kanzeon, Tara, in the Western tradition, Athena. Then we move into that essence of divine love that transcends duality. And that's where I think Mother Mary really gets her power. And in the Indian tradition, that's Bhuvaneshwari. All traditions have a way of describing that essence of the divine feminine, the essence of the divine masculine. So whatever name you give to it, it helps point to an experience that can be felt through our bodies.
So then, understanding that, how then, when you're doing work, do you access that for yourself, or do you access that for clients? Because conceptually, I understand what you're talking about, but like what is our entry point? How are we able to connect with something like that?
So Hal Stone, the founder of Voice Dialogue, always talked about working with the controller and the protector. They're the parts of our normal, everyday, waking ego self. And the controller manages our experience, and the protector is the primary protector. And so by dialoguing, and I use tapping in that process, the tapping and dialoguing helps to, one, be aware and conscious of the jobs they do for us, and then help those parts to discharge some of the holding and contracting energy in which they've been doing their job. They start to loosen up in the body and loosen up in the psyche. And then from there, it's possible to actually invite the voices or the subpersonalities of these very expansive parts and just shifting into them and then experiencing them leads to an immediate transcendence of the self in a very safe and gentle.
What it sounds like you're saying is that one of the very human parts of our experience, we're figuring out how and why it's functioning the way that it's functioning. And then what you're doing, so then are you then introducing one of these superconscious parts to have dialogue with it, or are you dialoguing with the superconscious part? Like how do we bring in this divine sense into the tapping process?
So I think one of the interesting differences in the way you and I work, you're always sort of always talking to the self, talking to the part.
Yep.
And I actually have people, have the sense of, my normal everyday waking self is stepped to the side of the room and is watching, observing, and listening. Yep. And I'm speaking to the controller. I'm responding and describing the experience of the controller. And then we shift and it's like, I'm speaking to the protector. And so when we move into these exalted archetypes, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, let me speak to beyond the beyond. So I'm experiencing that vast spaciousness. It's not a sense of, oh, I know that it's there, but
Gotcha.
I'm actually experiencing that transcendence.
And so as you describe that, with that draws me to, as I think about my hypnosis training, when we are revivifying a past experience, instead of having a conversation, like you said, in most of my work, the client is going to be having a conversation with the 5-year-old self. In hypnosis, when we're revivifying it, we are reliving as if we are 5 in that moment. And that is the part that is present in what is going on. And so what you're doing is you're tapping into these parts and you're saying, great, step into insert superconscious part. And then they just get a chance to be a part of that as they're doing that sort of work.
Yeah. Not even a part of, but I am.
Right.
I am the essence of Mary. I am the essence of Bhuvaneshwari. I am the essence of Athena. I am the essence of Buddha mind. So they get that firsthand experience of, it's like, oh, I am not separate from, I'm not different from, but I am these experiences and qualities of consciousness.
How much of an understanding at an archetypal level does your client have to have of those things?
Almost none.
Okay, because I think about, like just inside of the Judeo-Christian tradition and the different ways that God has been described over 3,500 years, from this very, very angry thing on a mountaintop to this very still spirit that comes on the wind. And it's oftentimes interesting when I'm having conversations about spiritual issues that the breakdown of the conversation is the understanding and the semantics of the super conscious that we are talking about. And so then I guess, what's your hypothesis or what's your thought in the ability, if they don't have a framework for the archetype, how are we then able to leverage that archetype as something that then becomes useful in the therapeutic process?
So there are a couple of answers to that. I'm going to do a simple answer, and if you want, I'll do a little more esoteric answer to that.
I want both of them. Yes, please.
So one, first, my audience is generally spiritual seekers.
Yep.
Most of them come from North America, and they come from a Judeo-Christian experience. And yet most of them have some general experience of the wide world that we live in, and different religions and different traditions, and some awareness of all the different mystical traditions that have come out of the shamanic, the Sufi, the Hindu, the Taoist, the Buddhist, certainly the Christian. I have such a passion for the Christian mystic. I know you mentioned Richard Rohr the other day. James Finley is one of my heroes.
Yep.
So all the mystics. So many of the people that I work with already have some sense of this sort of mystical experience versus the dramatic religious. Mm-hmm. So one, there's a spiritual curiosity that most of my clients come with.
Yep.
And so just that simple framework of the boarding house, and we're going to start with the controller protector. We're going to make sure that you're completely safe in this whole experience, and you have absolute permission to say no and stop the process if you've threatened in any way. And from that, once the controller and protector give permission and commitment to move forward, then most of the time it's very easy for people to move to these higher and higher states of consciousness. So I'll say that.
Okay.
The other thing is that we can talk about archetypes, we can talk about avatars, we can talk about gods and goddesses. I see them really as frequencies of energy in the universe that we live in. Mm-hmm. And we happen to give names to those frequencies. We happen to give personas to those frequencies. Yeah. And we can invoke those and experience those different frequencies beyond the names that we've given. Mm-hmm. And the soul part of us that is invested in us evolving and growing and healing into wholeness knows what those frequencies are and can help us move into them and guide our experience and then interpretation or understanding.
As you were saying that, I connected this dot. I do a fair bit of work with families that have children who've been diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And one of the first things that we do is we do using tapping to clear a lot of substance sensitivities. And sometimes we'll muscle test for things that my clients, the adults who are doing the tapping, and the children, substances that they don't know. Like it is just a scientific phrase of some sort. And simply with the information from that phrase and the collective consciousness that we have, that is enough for them to tune into the substance to be able to tap and to clear it. Because in some way, that word has become a shorthand for something that exists in the world. It's not, it's like a placeholder that draws that thing in, and we just need a small hook to that. And so listening to you talk about the superconscious archetypes, I can see that being the exact same thing. Like you are, without even realizing it, you are conveying a history and understanding when you say the word on a subliminal level that they're able to attach to in some way and be able to do that. That's really awesome. So then, using these particular things, are you and your clients starting with an issue and then bringing these in, or is it just an experience of getting in touch with these superconscious archetypes and having them bring, as you said, tapping into that healing that's coming with them from wherever they're coming from?
In the short answer of this question, do I start with a particular issue? It's nice to maybe have something to work on.
Mm-hmm.
But the first part, particularly when I'm doing demos, and I've done demos with hundreds of people in a room. I've done demos with 900 people on a Zoom call.
Mm-hmm.
People are having and tapping along, having this experience. So the first part is, okay, I'm a human being that has all this cast of characters. That's one awareness. But it's like, with 20 minutes or so, I can move into these exalted, expansive, enlightened parts of myself. And where tapping is so helpful. And when we're working with the defensive and constricted parts, one, it helps them to relax and open up. But then when we move into the enlightened archetypes and aspects of us, that experience when we're tapping with them, they get anchored into the connective tissues, what I call the connective tissue matrix. Mm-hmm. So we have a body memory of infinite stillness. We have a body memory of divine love. We have
Gotcha.
And so that's sort of the first sort of level of this work. It's like, I am these amazing exalted states. Now, the second piece is, as I said earlier, when we tap those energies or frequencies for healing, then we can begin to look at what is a particular defensive pattern. And that's why I love your work with resistance. Mm-hmm. That's the part resisting the action that I want to take. And we can channel those divine energies to the defensive patterns, and even ultimately to the wounded parts, the wounded selves, even the wounded children that are hidden underneath those defensive patterns. But to do it in a way where we're tapping the infinite energies. But I want to say that with one important point of caution. We have to develop an ego self, a centered self, a sense of self that is strong enough to be open to and can handle intense sensation moving through the body, intense emotions moving through the self, without getting overwhelmed, without getting swept away. So a part of all of my work is developing that sort of centered sense of self that can really withstand and be present to without withdrawing or escaping that intensity. And so the enlightened parts help to build that capacity to be present to the sensations that have been trapped in the body, the emotions that have been buried so deep in the body.
And I also can see a kind of a secondary benefit of building that self. Oftentimes, like I have spent 25 years speaking at retreats, and I've encountered people who basically just go from retreat high to retreat high to retreat high. And it's this euphoric thing that isn't grounded in any particular way in their daily life.
Right.
And so it just becomes, it's an escape, that is a temporary high, it's not actually transformative because they don't have grounding that they're able to take that transformation and have it rooted. So it becomes double edged. It's, I need to be rooted in order to experience the greatness of it. And I need to be grounded so that as I'm experiencing that, it's not an end in itself, but it becomes something that becomes a part of me. So I can take that with me into my daily life as I experience it. So it's not just a moment, but it's actual transformation. It's actual healing.
And that's embodied and that I carry with me 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
As a teacher, I see my job is to make myself as useless as quickly as possible for my clients.
Yep.
So it requires them to create that healthy ego, that aware ego, that centered self as quickly as possible, and to learn to use these tools on their own.
Yep.
Because if you only come to a demonstration or you only go to a workshop or you only go to a retreat, it's like, oh, you can go to a cocktail party and say, oh, I had this fabulous experience once.
Right. And then part of this, and this has been rattling around in my head, I'd love to hear the way you talk about this, is, you've been talking about this cast of characters, and sometimes people are scared that maybe I have multiple personalities and I have all of this stuff floating around inside of me and something is going to take over. How do you diffuse or explain away that concern for someone who shoves up when they become overwhelmed by this sense? Because when we're vivifying like the work you do, like it feels like a completely different experience. How do you talk about that particular piece of your work with your clients?
Well, the important distinction between this sense of we live with this cast of characters within us and multiple personality disorders is an important split. And the split is that separates, oh, I have these different parts that have a different experience and worldview and perspective on what I should be doing in any given moment. And sometimes there's definitely a tug of war going on between those parts. But then, what separates multiple personality disorder is there's a real split in reality and there's a disassociation of reality. And that's actually very rare.
Mm-hmm.
But the feeling that there are parts of me that if I spoke to them or let them come forward, I think revivify, is that the word that you're using?
Yeah.
They could, so being a drug addict and denying my emotions, I really had this thought, if I start crying, I lived through the AIDS epidemic. I lost literally thousands of friends and acquaintances in years. I thought if I start crying, I will never stop crying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or as a person who's been sober 30 years, it's like if I ever start, let the drug addict out of the basement, out of the dungeon, my God, I'll be out of control. Or if I ever let my anger up and out of the shackles that I've kept my anger, I am going to be this explosive bomb in the world. That's a legitimate concern that people have. And that's where developing that strong sense of centered presence is so essential. And then knowing that, I have allies. I have parts of my very aware and conscious, I call them the success team, that want us to thrive. They can help me balance the intensity of anger. They can help me anger that part of me that wants revenge, or they can help me anger, some of the other defensive parts that are so powerful because they've been charged with disowned energy for so long. We have to develop a center that can hold them.
Yeah. Which is one of those really lovely things that is simple to explain and not necessarily easy to execute as we navigate our way through all of those bits and pieces.
Yeah. And that's why I hire you to help me, because even the teachers need help. Yeah. So.
And I think the other thing that's I think is important for us to recognize inside of this is recognizing the fact that as we are, each time we gain more of that grounding in that center that you've been talking about, we are healthier. It's not an all or nothing proposition as we're navigating this, that it's this constantly improving and healing process that gives us the ability to navigate the world in a healthier way each and every moment as we're doing that process.
Yeah, I'll give you 4 different handles to think about that, centered self. And one is becoming just an adult, a healthy adult. The Freudians called it differentiated. The unions call it individuated.
Yep.
I just call it, a spiritual badass. So, but it's about growing up.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine, and the joke is, I go, Sally, we don't do that because we're now adults. She's like, right, I'm an adult. I don't have to do that anymore. And just recognizing that we get to act in a different way as we do all of those things through those 4 different lenses that you just described it.
But I say something. So, but here's the thing, when you really sort of take this on as a lifestyle, working with the subpersonalities or the selves, what you realize is that the spiritual badass or the differentiated or the adult human actually has a way to reconnect to that golden, innocent, vulnerable child that lives underneath all those layers of wounding and all those layers of defenses, and reconnect. And so that vivaciousness and spontaneity and the joy of our innocent child actually can reunite and merge with our adult self.
Yeah, adult is not cynical. Adult is not stuffy.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I enjoy about you is you do have, for all your competency and success in the world, you have this sort of silly, playful quality about you that sort of slips out on occasion. So.
Yeah, occasionally. So then if someone wants to access this work on their own, but they're not in a circumstance where they have any sense of any of the spiritual teachers that you have mentioned, is a reasonable entry point almost choosing my virtuous self and accessing and choosing a virtue and embodying that in a process like this if we don't have access or don't necessarily feel comfortable with? Because oftentimes when we don't understand something, it's easy to feel it is dangerous and doesn't fit for us. And, you and I have been lucky enough to have been exposed to lots of spiritual traditions, and not everybody is in that circumstance. So how would someone in that circumstance start?
Well, I would say yes. So, whatever language that feels safe and good to you. The important part of working with these higher archetypes is that you transcend the self. Mm. So, here's one of the shadow sides of this work that I see. A lot of people are born. I always ask the question, how many of you were born to fully enlightened, fully embodied parents? I've had one person raise their hand in all these years of asking that question, and she was sitting next to her mother and her stepfather when she did that. So I'm not sure how accurate that answer was. But depending on our family of origin, a fetus, a child, an infant, the first question is it safe to be in my body? And is it safe to be in this world? Mm-hmm. And for some people, that answer is absolutely. Yeah. And some people is equivocal, and some people of, yes, it is. A lot of the spiritual seekers that I see came from those family of origins where it was not safe to be in a body and it was not safe to be in this world. And part of the way they respond to that is by moving into either the mental and the theoretical realms, or they move into the spiritual realms, and they do develop amazing skills to live and experience the shamanic spiritual realms. But they're doing that from a place of deep, disowning their physical human experience. And so it's so important to realize that that's part of what's going on for some people, so that you bring it back to the body. That's why I'm always saying, come back to your center. And your center and your power is a physical experience. So that said, once you start to move into these higher states of consciousness, you can say higher self. I like to think the 7 deadly sins are just simply defenses that have been disowned. Yeah. Then you have the 7 virtues. Right. Beautiful qualities that exist in the soul's higher realms. But then you can, I like to think of the inner guru, the holy guardian angel. In the Latin, it was genius to the Romans. In the Greeks, it was the daemon. To me, they're all variations of the same, the highest part of our soul that know what our soul's purpose is, what our soul's destiny is, the evolution that we're intended to have in this life, and will assist us and help us. It's that part of us that has been through many incarnations, if you happen to believe in reincarnation, but it's the safest haven. It's the safest sacred ground for us. So connecting to that, whatever you call it, Again, it's a frequency of energy. It's a frequency of being.
Yeah.
It's the highest part of us, and it will guide us in a beautiful, gentle, delicate way so that we can experience the expanded parts of us, and that we can then come back and then begin to unpack these parts of us that are still very human and very defended and sometimes very.
And as you say this, for my work, I love just asking the part, what does it need? What does it have access to? And that's what you're talking about here, is this fact that we can, even with it, we're not exactly sure what is all there, when whatever we connect with has wisdom to it. And it's a way for us to get some translation so we're out of our conscious mind. So I like that a lot. Well, awesome. Well, Alan, thank you very much for your time. I love the way that our dispositions and work run in parallel to each other. And yeah, every time I get a chance to see you speak, I always learn a little bit, and it helps me in the work that I'm doing for sure. So thanks for your time. Absolutely.
Thank you. And I just want to say that I love how your work complements what I do, because you have this knack for, rather than going sort of the more formal process, you can go right into a sensation. It's like, what's your job?
Yeah.
What are you afraid of? And really, within my own experience, just help create shifts and change that are, quite miraculous, actually. So thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. There's so much food for thought in there, in giving us approaches to think about what we are experiencing and the way that we can access all forms of grace and transformation to create new versions of ourselves that are healthier, that are more actualized, that are not carrying the wounds of the past. If you are interested in Alan's work, and Alan's work is still up, and there's lots of things that you can purchase, and there are lots of things that you can download for free, if you just go through throughyourbody.com, that is throughyourbody.com, you will find many, many, many amazing resources from Alan. And if you don't know him, it's an opportunity to go get to know him a little better. If you know someone in your life who would appreciate a conversation like this, who could see these lenses of parts and archetypes as a way of creating transformation in their life, please pass this along. Don't spam your inbox, but you might know one or two people who would really love this conversation. And if you pass it along and they don't open it, that's okay, because you've reached out to someone else in your life saying, hey, I was thinking of you. I thought you might find this really, really interesting. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast. In podcasting parlance, subscribe is always free. You can do it in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, Audible, basically everywhere you get audio. If you just search Tapping Q&A, click subscribe, click follow, whatever button there is in whatever app that you are looking at, and make sure you turn on those notifications. So every single time a new episode comes out, you are alerted, so you can take some time and do a little learning or do a little tapping. If you have a question, a comment, or a topic that you would like me to cover in the future, I would love to hear from you. I can always be reached, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. Or if you happen to be on the website, just click on that contact link in the upper right-hand corner. Those messages do not go to a VA. I get every single one of them. And I love, love, love hearing from you. Some of the best topics, some of the best conversations have come from suggestions from people just like you. So please, please reach out. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrestelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrestelli Tapping Q&A. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrestelli and Tapping Q&A.